Okay, so hello everyone. I will talk about Utopias of extinction, and I think yesterday we delved a bit into certain responses to these multiple crises that we are facing, and this is one of, I think, the most curious responses that one can get, because extinction in the title refers actually to human extinction. So my point of departure will be that we've been already discussing yesterday quite a lot, that lately we are witnessing a surge in contemplating multiple versions of end times, but we didn't really went into the question of what discourses actually we are witnessing in the surge of these end times. And of course we witness it in popular and cinematic imagination, but much more interestingly, we are also witnessing it in scientific imaginaries. And of course, in the most extreme Earth systems trajectories of a hothouse Earth, according to Earth System Science paper, we are witnessing it in technoscientific discussions about technoscientific developments tipping beyond what we conceive of as human futures and leading us to different conceptions of post-human futures, of singularity, imaginaries, transhumanist aspirations, and so on. A bit we touched upon these yesterday as well, and I think Andy was talking about rogue AI for a brief moment. And then the question is that what end times are these exactly? What is the novelty of these end times, especially as compared to previous versions of end times that that have been widely discussed? And I think that what distinguishes these end times imaginaries today is that they are contemplating self-authored human extinction, in which one of the main emphasis is the self-authored point, which highlights the anthropogenic character of potential human extinction. So what we are, let's say, in the last 50 years increasingly contemplate in these discourses is the end of human existence, which of course has been contemplated before due to mainly natural risks. So in the risk research that Jessica was talking about yesterday also distinguishes between natural existential risk and anthropogenic existential risks, and these are the anthropogenic existential risks that lately yeah, thank you, become contemplated much more frequently. And the point I would like to highlight about these imaginaries is that they have a historical character, because in as much as they enter change over time, that which we call ahistorical is that which doesn't change over time, right? So in as much as there is change over time in these imaginaries, they remain historical, but they are historical in a very, very different way as we have become used to in the last 200 centuries or so, because they are not about this processual developmental change as we typically been thinking, the terms in which we have been typically thinking about the development of human societies. So this is the point of departure, and this is my thesis that I would like to flesh out in a bit more detail in the next, let's say, 25 minutes. So the thesis says, I will just read up, that prospects of human extinction hint at a structural transformation of historical thought, which gives way to the emergence of a new form of utopianism, which I would like to call extinction utopianism. So before I could flesh out this thesis, of course, I will need to say a few words about what exactly is extinction utopianism and what extinction utopias are. So, well, plainly speaking, these are utopian renderings of prospects of human extinction, and I came across the idea that human extinction can be looked at in a utopian way when I was asked to comment on Patricia Vieira's paper Utopia and Dystopia in the Age of the Anthropocene. And interestingly, what I found was that Vieira's discussion was pretty much focused on literary and cinematic imaginaries, and those are the imaginaries mostly where humans survive in the end. So technically, these are actually not about extinctions in the strong sense, because inasmuch as there is one human left, the story will be about that human which survives. And this is what happens mainly in literary renderings of let's say collapse rather than human extinction, which made me think that then, okay, we need to distinguish between these end times imaginaries which points onwards to the possibility of human extinction, and I think that on this basis we can actually distinguish between weak and a strong extinction utopianism. And weak extinction utopianism would mean then utopian takes on the rebooting of the human endeavor after societal or civilizational collapse, and the case in point that I will just briefly discuss will be collapsology. And strong extinction utopianism would mean utopian takes on the discontinuation of human existence, and the case in point that I will discuss is the voluntary human extinction movement. Have you heard about it? And ahumanism. So just to zoom on a bit on collapsology, but really briefly, I myself didn't really delve into this because the focus of the talk will be the other kind of extinction utopianism. So it's Pablo Severin and Raphael Stevens, How Everything Can Collapse, and Another End of the World is Possible. These are two books. On the left side is the one which came out first, and it has the, interestingly, the English translation do not feature the subtitles because they are actually the most telling, because the first subtitle says A Manual for Our Times, and the second says Living in the Collapse, or Living the Collapse, and not merely surviving it. So what it means that, of course, the first book was mainly focusing on the fact that that collapse will happen, and that the second book is the one which addresses the question that, okay, collapse happens, so what comes next? So these are, especially in the case of, especially in the second case, it's about how to deal with collapse, which they think inevitably will happen. And of course, that which we are going to do after the collapse has that kind of a utopian flair of rebuilding civilization. So, and yes, I also note on the slide a side note that the voluntary human extinction movement also divided between supporters and volunteers who are, let's say, a fraction favors more, somehow surviving, and then there is another fraction which explicitly advocates phasing out of human existence. And I feature here a couple of quotes from their website, which is not really a manifesto, and it's a sort of a funny read, and they also comment on why they are actually not without humor, or why they are approaching the prospect of human extinction in a humorous way. But I think it's the quotes that I selected for today are very or highlight a couple of interesting aspects of the way that they present their case. So just the basic, the first thing that the only action required for becoming a voluntary human extinction movement volunteer or supporter is not adding another human being to the population. So that means is just not to reproduce. It's a very peaceful way of phasing out what they advocate, and they even think that this is what they suggest is a very humanistic way of ending human existence. In fact, this is the true humanism according to their website. So they say that voluntary human extinction is the humanitarian alternative to human disasters. The massive die-off of humanity, predicted by so many as a result of our overshoot of Earth's carrying capacity, is what the voluntary human extinction movement hopes to avoid. So the point of phasing out human existence is to avoid something even worse, which would be what collapsologists say will inevitably happen, and whatever calamities follow. They also say that it is an Earth-centered worldview, and an Earth-centered worldview sees Homo sapiens as one of tens of millions of species in Earth's biosphere. By envisioning Earth's entire biosphere, acknowledging the intrinsic value of every life form, our voluntary extinction begins to make sense. Finally, the last words of their presentation of the case is that we're the only species evolved enough to consciously go extinct for the good of all life, or which needs to... yeah, probably I misquoted something. In any case, success would be humanity's crowning achievement. May we live long and die out. And the second case is Ahumanism. This is Patricia McCormack's book, The Ahuman Manifesto, Activism for the End of the Anthropocene, in which, well, the book endorses all human emancipatory movements as well, but one of the most curious things that it endorses and actively advocates is, again, human extinction in the same way as does the voluntary human extinction movement, by phasing out humanity. Or human existence. And the two quotes I selected is, the first is that, put very simply, human extinction can be understood as a good idea for ecosophical ethics and need not be considered unthinkable, but can be welcomed as an affirmative of Earth's life. And the second is sort of comparing what she advocates to the Extinction Rebellion movement. And as usual, everybody tries to overcome anthropocentrism and at the same time accuses of everybody else of not succeeding in overcoming anthropocentrism. And this is what happens here is, it says that the Extinction Rebellion remains anthropocentric at heart because it sees the threat of ecological crisis primarily through the lens of a threat to human survival. It makes no room for the grace of stepping aside and embracing human extinction so that the world may flourish, which would be the most effective form of rebellion against individual death, the death of diversity, or species extinction. So this was just a brief intro into embracing human extinction. And then there are two questions that I would like to zoom in the second half of the talk. And the first question is that, how did extinction utopianism as a Denkfigur, or as a form of thought, come about in the first place? What were the conditions of possibility of its emergence? So that's, let's say, the historical question. And then the second is that, what is the politics of extinction utopianism, both in its weak and strong versions? So, to start with the first one, of course, I will need to say a few words about utopia, but really just a very few words. And the point I would like to highlight before we get to talking about utopia is the way that thinking about endings has sort of accompanied modern historical thinking in the last 2 centuries. And I selected a few things which has been claimed to have ended only in the last, let's say, after the second half of the second half of the last century, except the end of history, which has been there since the idea of history has emerged. So here's the illustrious list: ideology, utopia, the human reason, art, theory, history, and so forth. Probably you can add a lot of other things in your respective fields which have already claimed to have or have come an end. So, but what I would like to stick is the idea of history, that history ends, because the most curious thought, all discussions about the end of history always focus on the idea of end of history. And what I would like to see it is in relation to the idea of the end of the world. Because when you talk about ideas, it's in relation to other ideas that you actually see their transformation. And it's in its relational way you better grasp their meanings and what is the change that happens in regard of the meanings of these ideas. And what I find the most interesting is that all the talks about the end of history was always accompanied by the idea that the world continues to exist. So history comes to an end. it comes to an end either in a fulfillment or it comes to an end as the end of historical thought itself, but the world goes on. And what happens today is that everybody thinks that history goes on, but the world ends. And I think that's also a very, very curious thought, that we started to contemplate the end of the world while saying that the world ends. And of course, the world ends means the world ends for humans, but history goes on without humans. So just keep this in mind, because now comes the part about utopia. And again, just a few notes about utopia. So probably you know that utopia emerged in early modern imagination, and typically it referred to faraway lands that you could approach, as in the cover of Thomas More's book. By a sea journey, somehow you get there, somehow you make your way back, and you forget how did you get there. So actually you cannot tell your friends and peers how did you get there, and nobody else can go to that place. But the point is that these were, of course, spatial utopias in modern imagination. And they started their career as no places and nowhere. And in early modern imagination. And in modernity, they have been transformed into temporal utopias. So instead of faraway lands, they have been moved into the future. And in as much as they have been moved into the future, they have become also reachable. And the way that they have become reachable is through historical processes that were supposed to lead there. And there you have practically all modern ideologies and all modern forms of political thinking, which of course claim one or suppose one or another desired future and one or another way to get there, but all the modern ideologies are historical, be they conservative of slow progress, be they revolutionary, be they just liberal ideologies, all have their desired futures through that you are supposed to reach through a historical process. So what happens to these kind of utopian thinking, the sort of temporal utopia of modernity? Well, utopia, I think, adapts. So when we have futures which no longer appear to be human betterment, then utopias find a way or utopian thought finds a way to deal with the situation. And I also put up on a sort of an equation onto the slide. So remember the previous idea that history goes on even when the world ends. And there is the thought that we saw in the extinction utopianist arguments for their case, that if humans are the malaise of the planet and planetary life, and if history goes on even when the world ends, then betterment must mean taking human existence out of the equation. So in a way, it sounds logical. And the point, so just to wrap up the thing, that as long as there is history, there is utopia. And extinction utopianism, I think, is the form of utopian thought designed for a historical condition beyond the end of the world without humans. And what is then the politics of these kind of extinction utopianism? And I would like to start with weak extinction utopianism, which is practically rebooting the human endeavor. And of course, historians who say that nothing is new will say that this is nothing new, because the myth of new beginning is a central feature of modern historical thinking. And of course, all the experiences of the 19th and 20th centuries about everything's appearing suddenly new, and people feel that they are being in a new world. Of course, the futurist movements. all abstract art, and you know the everyday experiences as well. It has been researched quite extensively. You know, of course, the political sort of conceptions of new beginnings which circle around the idea of revolution, but or yet the kind of new beginning that we witness also in collapsology is something different than these things, because first of all, it implies a sort of a conscious preparation for the collapse, which is not something, it's not how you do revolution. And second, it doesn't aim at socio-political transformation, but a full-scale civilizational reboot, right? So it's not, we, a community, will enter a new sort of phase in which our socio-political condition will be different. It will be something which, at least in scale, is different from previous kinds of ideas about new beginnings. And I would like to start to explore the politics of weak extinction utopianism by a quote from Pierre Charbonnier, who's a sharp critic of collapsology. And what he says is that above all is the role of climate catastrophe in the mechanics of collapse, a precious opportunity to cheerfully cast off the entire burden of technical, legal, and economic interventions that has weighed humanity down throughout this modern parenthesis, and to win back our primitive freedom, the only true liberty there is. Because what he sees that happens in collapsology, that the kind of civilizational reboot that they advocate is actually a return to pre-societal, pre-civilizational, and pre-political existence. So to start afresh to the extent that everything that has before the social contract or whatever, to go back to the Rousseau kind of natural state kind of thing. So what this means is, of course, a sort of romanticizing the pre-societal and the pre-civilizational, and of course, as recent human and social scientific sensitivities would pose the question, which is a question that we already posed many times yesterday, would we arrive there with everyone being equally prepared for the collapse, and who would build things anew? And from that point onwards, probably you already know the story of the politics of extinction utopianism in the human and social sciences. But what I'm more interested in, because what I think is the actual or the genuine novelty of thinking about extinction utopianism is strong extinction utopianism. And there we have a very clear politics in their self-definition, which is of course the anti-anthropocentric or the post-anthropocentric view, which they claim to bring to its logical consequence. So in the self-definition of the voluntary human extinction movement, they advocate an Earth-centered worldview, which I was highlighting in the previous slides. And the ahuman activism of the Ahuman Manifesto, it also presents human extinction as a way out of anthropocentrism, even as measured against other attempts to overcome anthropocentrism. So then the question is that, is this really, or can strong extinction utopianism really overcome anthropocentrism? And then the doubts that can emerge about this is exactly the sort of accusations that different brands of anti-anthropocentric thinking sort of label against each other, that they are actually the ones who remain anthropocentric. But it's in this case, you may ask the question whether it's not just remains anthropocentric, but scales up anthropocentrism to the extent that it contemplates the life after humans in human terms. So we as humans even tell what is good for the planet and planetary life even after we no longer exist. And this also a sort of an intricacy of the idea of human extinction. I think that strong extinction utopianism, yes, seems to know what is good, not only for humanity, but also for Earth, for the web of planetary life, even after humans. And it advocates, of course, a decision about Earth and the web of planetary life on behalf of the Earth and planetary life, on behalf of the well-being of the Earth's biota. And it infuses values even into post-human futures. I'm very good at timing because this is my last slide, which is not really a conclusion. And well, I could also just wrap up that, in this talk I said this and that, but I already said that, so I'm not doing it. What I say, what I do instead is, first of all, I just want to make clear that I'm not arguing for extinction utopianism, but I also don't argue against it. I just point to its existence, and what I wish to highlight by zooming in on the fringes of the responses given to this multiple crisis that we are facing is just to highlight the complexity of the situation and all the perplexities, the self-contradictions and the conflicts in the ways in which we try to navigate our planetary predicament. And to leave you with a couple of questions is, well, I highlighted only a few, but well, all these questions point to the fact that what exactly is extinction utopianism? So does it represent anti-anthropocentrism and emancipatory thinking pushed to its ultimate logical consequence? So is this where emancipatory thought will lead us in the end? Is it the logical end of the whole thing? Or is it only a glitch in the matrix, only in the anti-anthropocentric worldview? Or is it actually the ultimate form of anthropocentrism in an anti-anthropocentric disguise? So what is it? Yes, thank you.